There comes a moment in every human life when the exhausting chase finally begins to crack. Not because the world changes, not because people suddenly become kinder, but because something deep within the psyche grows tired of begging for permission to exist. Most people spend years unconsciously seeking validation. They search for it in praise, in relationships, in achievements, in social approval, and even in the silent hope that someone will finally recognize their worth. Yet Carl Jung understood a painful truth. The more desperately we seek validation from others, the further we drift from our authentic self. The tragedy is that validation feels like love. It feels like acceptance. It feels like safety. But beneath it often hides fear. The fear of rejection, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear that without approval, we might discover we are not enough. And so the mask is born. The mask that smiles when it wants to scream. The mask that agrees when it wants to disagree. The mask that performs, pleases, and adapts itself to fit the expectations of everyone except the person wearing it. But then a strange day arrives. A day when the applause no longer feels satisfying. A day when approval loses its intoxicating power. A day when the soul quietly asks a dangerous question. What if I stopped living for their acceptance? That question changes everything. Because the moment validation loses its grip, a hidden transformation begins. Relationships shift. Priorities change. Old fears rise to the surface. The false self starts to crumble, and something far more powerful emerges from beneath it. In Jungian psychology, this is not merely personal growth. It is the beginning of individuation, the courageous journey back to who you truly are. And once that journey begins, there is no returning to the person you used to be. PT1, the invisible prison of approval. Few people realize they are living inside a prison because the bars are invisible. From childhood, most of us are taught a subtle lesson. Approval equals survival. When we behave correctly, we receive praise. When we conform, we are accepted. When we satisfy expectations, we feel loved. Gradually, the mind begins to form an unconscious equation. I am valuable only when others approve of me. Carl Jung believed that this process gives birth to what he called the persona, the social mask we create to function in society. The persona is not inherently bad. In fact, it serves an important purpose. It helps us navigate relationships, careers, and social environments. The problem begins when the mask becomes our identity. At that point, life turns into performance. Every decision becomes filtered through a silent question. What will people think? The career chosen because it looks impressive. The relationship maintained because leaving would disappoint others. The opinions hidden because speaking honestly feels dangerous. The dreams abandoned because they do not fit society's expectations. Little by little, the authentic self disappears beneath layers of adaptation. The frightening part is that this often feels normal. People become so accustomed to seeking validation that they mistake it for ambition. They mistake it for kindness. They mistake it for responsibility. Yet beneath these behaviors often lies a deep dependence on external approval. The validation seeker is constantly monitoring the reactions of others. A compliment creates temporary confidence. Criticism creates emotional collapse. Rejection feels catastrophic. Silence feels threatening. Their emotional state becomes controlled by forces outside themselves. This is why external validation can never provide lasting peace. No amount of praise is ever enough. No achievement feels permanent. No recognition fully satisfies the hunger. Because the problem was never the lack of approval. The problem was giving other people authority over your sense of worth. Jung understood that true psychological maturity begins when a person recognizes this dependency. The awakening is uncomfortable because it forces us to confront an unsettling reality. Much of what we call our personality may actually be a collection of strategies designed to gain acceptance. And when that realization arrives, the prison door becomes visible for the first time. The question is no longer whether the prison exists. The question becomes whether you are willing to walk out of it. PT2, the painful collapse of the false self. The day you stop seeking validation does not feel like freedom at first, it feels like loss. Many people imagine personal transformation as a moment of empowerment and confidence and clarity. But Jung observes something very different. Before a new self can emerge, the old self must begin to fall apart, and that process is rarely comfortable. When you stop chasing approval, you quickly discover how much of your life was built around it. Suddenly, you are no longer saying yes to things you secretly resent. You stop explaining yourself endlessly. You stop trying to convince people to understand your choices. You stop shaping your identity around what earns applause. And almost immediately, resistance appears. Some people become confused, others become disappointed, a few become angry. This surprises many individuals because they assume authenticity will automatically improve every relationship. Yet the opposite often happens in the beginning. Why? Because many relationships are unconsciously built upon predictable roles. The people pleaser, the rescuer, the caretaker, the peacemaker, the achiever. When you stop performing the role others have grown comfortable with, the entire dynamic begins to shift. Jung believed that beneath the persona exists the authentic self, a deeper center of being that cannot be fully defined by social expectations. But accessing that self requires sacrifice. The sacrifice is the image you carefully spent years constructing. This is where fear becomes intense. You may wonder, what if people stop liking me? What if I disappoint everyone? What if I lose relationships? What if I discover that I have no idea who I really am? These fears are not signs that something is wrong. They are signs that something real is happening. Because for the first time, your identity is no longer being maintained by constant external feedback. You are standing alone with yourself, and that can feel terrifying. Many people retreat at this stage. The discomfort becomes overwhelming, so they return to familiar patterns. They seek approval again because approval feels safer than uncertainty. But those who continue discover something remarkable. The collapse of the false self is not destruction. It is revelation. Every layer that falls away exposes something more genuine underneath. Every fear faced weakens the need for outside validation. Every act of authenticity strengthens an inner foundation that no criticism can easily shake. The person who emerges from this process is not fearless. They simply no longer allow fear of rejection to control their life. And that marks the beginning of a profound psychological transformation, one that Jung believed was essential for becoming whole. Because the moment the false self begins to crumble, the real journey finally starts. PT3. The shadow appears when validation disappears. One of Carl Jung's most profound insights was that every human being carries a shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is not some dark force hiding within the psyche. It is simply the collection of traits, emotions, desires, and truths that we have rejected because they were unacceptable to others, or unacceptable to the image we wanted to maintain. And for many people, the need for validation is what keeps the shadow buried. Think about it. If your identity depends on being seen as kind, you may suppress your anger. If your identity depends on being admired, you may hide your insecurities. If your identity depends on being agreeable, you may bury your ability to say no. The more desperately we seek approval, the more of ourselves we push into the darkness. But something unexpected happens when validation loses its importance. The shadow begins to surface. Suddenly, emotions you spent years avoiding demand attention. Resentment appears. Frustration emerges. Old wounds return. Unspoken desires rise from the depths. At first, this can feel like regression. Many people become alarmed because they assume personal growth should make them feel lighter and happier. Instead, they find themselves confronting uncomfortable parts of their personality. Jung would argue that this discomfort is necessary. You cannot become whole while rejecting half of yourself. The individual who constantly seeks validation often lives in a state of inner division. Certain traits are welcomed into consciousness because they earn approval. Other traits are exiled because they threaten acceptance. The result is a fragmented identity. But individuation, the process Jung considered the highest form of psychological development, requires integration, not perfection. Integration. This means learning to acknowledge your anger without becoming consumed by it. It means recognizing your ambition without feeling guilty about it. It means accepting your weaknesses without allowing them to define you. It means admitting uncomfortable truths about yourself instead of hiding behind a carefully constructed image. The irony is that the qualities we fear most often contain hidden strength. The person who suppresses anger may discover healthy boundaries. The person who suppresses confidence may discover leadership. The person who suppresses independence may discover freedom. The shadow does not exist to destroy you. It exists to complete you. And this is why the journey away from validation is so powerful. When you no longer need everyone to approve of who you are, you gain the courage to see who you actually are. Not the polished version, not the socially acceptable version, not the version designed to impress, the real version. And although that encounter can be unsettling, it is also liberating. Because the moment you stop running from your shadow, it stops controlling your life from behind the scenes. For the first time, your energy is no longer spent maintaining an illusion. It is spent becoming whole. PT4. Why people react when you finally change. One of the most surprising parts of personal transformation is not what happens inside you, it is what happens around you. The moment you stop seeking validation, people begin responding differently. Some become distant, some become confused. Some suddenly accuse you of becoming selfish, cold, arrogant, or difficult. At first, this reaction feels unfair. After all, you are not trying to hurt anyone. You are simply learning how to live without constantly needing permission. Yet Jung understood something that many people discover only through experience. When you change, you force others to confront the roles they assign to you. For years, they may have known exactly who you were. The one who always agreed, the one who never said no. The one who always explained themselves. The one who carried emotional burdens that did not belong to them. The one who sacrificed personal needs to keep everyone comfortable. These patterns become predictable. People grow accustomed to them. Entire relationships can unconsciously organize themselves around them. Then one day, everything shifts. You begin speaking more honestly. You stop over-explaining your decisions. You refuse invitations that drain your energy. You establish boundaries where none existed before, and suddenly people who benefited from the old version of you feel uncomfortable. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because the familiar dynamic has been disrupted. This is why growth often feels lonely. Many individuals expect authenticity to be universally celebrated. In reality, authenticity frequently exposes relationships that were dependent on compliance rather than genuine connection. Jung believed that psychological development requires separation from the collective expectations that shape our identity. This does not mean rejecting society or isolating yourself from others. It means refusing to abandon yourself in order to belong. And that distinction changes everything. The need for belonging is deeply human. The need to be understood is deeply human. The need to be loved is deeply human. But when these needs become dependent on constant approval, they begin to imprison the soul. True freedom arrives when you realize that rejection is survivable. Disapproval is survivable. Misunderstanding is survivable. What becomes unbearable is the endless sacrifice of your authentic self. As this realization deepens, something remarkable happens. The fear of disappointing others starts losing its power. You become less concerned with managing perceptions, less concerned with controlling opinions, less concerned with earning acceptance from people who only value the version of you that serves their expectations. And while some relationships fade during this process, others become stronger than ever. Because the connections that survive are no longer built upon performance. They are built upon truth. For perhaps the first time in your life, people are not connecting with your mask, they are connecting with you. And that is where real belonging begins. PT5. The freedom Jung called individuation. At the end of the journey, something extraordinary begins to happen. Not all at once, not in a dramatic flash of enlightenment, but gradually, almost quietly, you start noticing a profound shift within yourself. The opinions of others still exist, criticism still exists, rejection still exists, but they no longer possess the same power they once had. The chains have weakened. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are. For Jung, the purpose of life was not happiness in the conventional sense. It was not popularity, status, or endless approval. The purpose was wholeness. To become whole means bringing together the fragmented parts of the psyche, the persona and the shadow, strength and vulnerability, conscious desires and unconscious truths. the person the world sees and the person you actually are, and this integration becomes possible only when validation stops being the center of your existence. Because as long as your worth depends on external approval, your life belongs to the crowd. Your choices belong to the crowd. Your identity belongs to the crowd. Your future belongs to the crowd. But the moment you reclaim your worth, something changes. You begin making decisions from conviction rather than fear. You pursue goals because they matter to you, not because they impress others. You speak honestly even when honesty is unpopular. You walk away from situations that require self-betrayal. You stop negotiating your value with people who cannot see it. This does not make life easier. In many ways, it makes life more demanding, because now the responsibility belongs entirely to you. There is no audience to tell you who you should become, no applause to guide your next step, no external authority capable of defining your identity, only the quiet voice within. And learning to trust that voice may be one of the hardest tasks a human being can undertake. Yet it is also one of the most rewarding. Because beneath the endless search for validation lies a deeper longing. Not the desire to be admired, not the desire to be accepted, but the desire to be real, to live without pretending, to speak without performing, to love without manipulating, to exist without constantly seeking confirmation that you deserve to exist. This is the freedom that emerges when validation loses its grip, a freedom that cannot be given by others and cannot be taken away by them, a freedom born from self-knowledge, a freedom born from courage, a freedom born from becoming who you were always meant to be. And on the day you stop seeking validation, everything changes, not because the world changes, but because, at last, you do. PT6, the strange peace of no longer needing to prove yourself. There is a stage in this transformation that few people talk about. After the struggle, after the loneliness, after the collapse of old identities. A strange peace begins to emerge. It does not arrive with celebration. It does not announce itself with certainty. In fact, many people almost miss it. One day, someone misunderstands you, and you do not feel the urge to defend yourself. Someone doubts your abilities, and you no longer spend hours trying to prove them wrong. Someone rejects your value, and instead of questioning your worth, you simply recognize their opinion as their own. This is not indifference. It is liberation. For years, validation seekers unconsciously live as if every judgment is a verdict. Every criticism becomes evidence. Every rejection becomes a reflection of personal worth. As a result, their emotional life becomes exhausting. They are constantly managing perceptions, constantly correcting misunderstandings, constantly trying to control how they appear in the minds of others. But there is a hidden truth Jung understood. You cannot control how people see you. Every person interprets you through the lens of their own experiences, wounds, expectations, fears, and desires. One person will admire your confidence. Another will call it arrogance. One person will appreciate your boundaries. Another will call you selfish. One person will respect your independence. Another will feel threatened by it. The same action can generate completely opposite reactions. The same truth can inspire one person and offend another. The same version of you can be loved and disliked at the exact same time. The mature individual eventually realizes that trying to manage these contradictions is impossible, and with that realization comes peace. Not because everyone approves, but because approval is no longer required. This is where inner authority begins to replace external authority. Your values become your compass, your conscience becomes your guide, your self-awareness becomes your foundation. The crowd loses its power to define reality. For perhaps the first time, you stop measuring your life through the reactions of others. Instead, you begin asking different questions. Am I being honest? Am I acting in alignment with my principles? Am I becoming more conscious? Am I living according to my deepest truth? These questions lead inward rather than outward. And that inward movement changes everything, because the person who no longer needs constant validation discovers something remarkable. The energy once spent proving yourself can now be spent becoming yourself. The battle ends, the performance ends, the endless pursuit ends. And in the silence that follows, you discover a peace that applause could never provide. A peace rooted not in acceptance from the world, but in acceptance of yourself. PT7. The return to your authentic life. At the deepest level, the search for validation is not really about approval, It is about forgetting who you are. And the journey away from validation is ultimately a journey home. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries within them a unique pattern of potential, a self that longs to emerge throughout life. Yet most people spend decades moving away from that centre. They become who others expect them to be, who society rewards them for being, who fear tells them they must become. By the time adulthood arrives, many can no longer distinguish between their authentic desires and the expectations they have absorbed from the world around them. They live successfully, but not truthfully. They achieve, but they do not feel fulfilled. They receive admiration, but they remain strangely empty. Why? Because the soul cannot be nourished by validation. It can only be nourished by authenticity. This is why the day you stop seeking validation becomes a turning point. Not because your problems disappear, not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because your relationship with yourself fundamentally changes. You stop treating yourself as a project that needs approval. You stop viewing your worth as something that must be earned. You stop chasing permission to exist. Instead, you begin living from a deeper place, a place where your value is inherent, a place where mistakes do not diminish your humanity, a place where criticism does not erase your dignity, a place where rejection does not invalidate your existence. And from that place, life begins to feel different. Decisions become clearer, relationships become more honest, goals become more meaningful. Even suffering becomes easier to bear because you are no longer fighting against yourself. The greatest transformation is not confidence, it is self-possession. The quiet knowledge that your identity belongs to you, that your worth is not up for debate, that your life does not require unanimous approval. This is the gift waiting on the other side of validation. Not superiority, not perfection, not invulnerability, but freedom. The freedom to be who you are without apology. The freedom to walk your path without constant reassurance. The freedom to honour your soul, even when the crowd does not understand it. And perhaps that is what Jung was pointing toward all along. The highest achievement is not becoming someone others admire. It is becoming yourself, completely, courageously, and without needing permission. In conclusion, the day you stop seeking validation, the world may look exactly the same. The same people will exist. The same opinions will exist. The same judgments will exist. But you will no longer be their prisoner. Carl Jung taught that the path to wholeness requires courage. The courage to face your shadow, release your mask, and discover the authentic self hidden beneath years of conditioning. That journey is not easy. It asks you to risk misunderstanding. It asks you to release approval. It asks you to trust yourself when external reassurance disappears. Yet the reward is extraordinary, because when validation no longer controls your choices, your life finally becomes your own. You stop performing. You stop proving. You stop asking the world for permission to exist. And in that moment, you discover something that was never missing. Your worth was never in the hands of others. It was within you all along. The day you realize that is the day everything changes.